Jesus came not to abolish the law and get rid of it, which is what a lot of people wanted him to do, but to fulfill it. You see, all of those laws that point us into that true north, that unmoving, unshakable God that's ever present, they give us and point us to a God who loves us, right? They point us to someone who cares enough to actually send Jesus. And so in Jesus, we see that he's a fulfillment of all of this, that his love reigns. True north. We've talked about it for a couple weeks now. And just kind of that idea of having a direction in our life. We start a new kind of series that's going to be looking at the 10 Commandments throughout the summer. We're going to take little breaks from it, but the idea here is that the 10 Commandments really do give us a centering point, a point that we can look to that's unshakable, unmovable, ever present, and we get to lean in on that as a firm foundation for our faith. We're going to be also looking at Luther's Small Catechism as we do that, kind of as we have been doing for the rest of, or since the beginning of the year in different pieces. As I was thinking about True North and thinking about the sermon today, I was up at Camp Luther Haven and as the minister of the week, and I was reminded of one of my first weeks of being a camp counselor in Bellingham, Washington. And in that, I was given a topographical map and a compass, and I was told, you know what, you can explore this mountain, a part of the Cascades, and you can go up, you can use the logging roads, you can do anything you want, just don't get lost because you have 8 campers behind you. And within a 2-mile radius of camp, you're going to be able to use this radio, and here you go. Problem is, we kept on hiking, and our little campers wanted to be trailblazers, so we got off the path, we kept on going, and before we knew it, we were a little lost. And being a little lost, you pull out the radio, no one's there. And so some skills that my dad taught me needed to come into play, right? The never eat soggy worms, the, compass rose kind of coming in. The problem being, there's a difference between true north and magnetic north, right? And so this kind of concept came to mind because magnetic north can be like 6 degrees off of true north, at least in the Pacific Northwest. Here it's more like 4 degrees. But as you're thinking about that, it might not seem too much. But when you are looking at a map and you're trying to get to a location and you end up on the other side of the map because you forgot to take into account certain things, you realize that magnetic north may not be the best thing to guide you. And then if you study magnetic north a little bit more, you learn that solar flares can move it a little bit, right? And that it can be shifting, and depending on where you're at in the world, it can just, it can give and take just a little bit. The idea of True North as a sermon series, I think, is so important to us, because there's this idea that if we see God as true north, then we know that he's not going to be shaken and he's not going to move on a whim like magnetic north might. And so we see the importance of seeing who God is and what he's done for us as a vital piece of our faith. And so keeping that in mind, I want to just talk in general a little bit about the commandments as law, right? So they were considered the law of Moses. And as Martin Luther talks about law, he talks about it in this way. That the law, God's law, works in our lives as a curb, and a guide. And if you have grown up in the Lutheran Church, you've probably heard those, but you may not remember what they exactly mean. Well, we have all at some point in our lives woken up, looked in the mirror, and thought, oof, that's rough, right? Like, it's just the reality. You've had a bad night's sleep. You had to get up and you had to run out at 2 a.m., right? Or you worked the overnight shift and you're just dragging. But you know what it's like to have your reflection come back at you and realize it's not perfect. Well, guess what? That's what we are. We're not perfect people. We live in a sinful world and we are sinful people. And so we get that. So at times when we look at God's law, we see this reflection. It's also a curb. Now, for all you drivers out there, what would happen if you barreled into that curb going straight? Well, there's going to be consequences. You're going to have a flat tire, a bent rim. You're probably going to need some body work, right? And so the idea of a curb is that you see the consequences of what's coming your way before it actually happens. And so you're able to curb your behavior or thoughts or whatever the case may be. And then the last is a guide, a little bit of a how-to. This is how we see the world around us through the lens of God's grace that bring a love and a forgiveness that bring us hope, and that matters. And so for Luther, he talks about how different people kind of see the lens of the law in different ways. I think as we look at the Ten Commandments over the next few weeks and months, my hope is that you see the law in different ways, that sometimes it might be a mirror, sometimes it might be a curb, sometimes it might be a guide. But in all of that, Luther didn't just stick with law and say, here, I'm going to point out all the things you have done wrong or you should not be doing or that you need to be doing. I'm going to also lean in on the gospel. Because knowing that we're not perfect, if we stay there from the law, we miss God's grace. And that is one of the biggest elements and blessings that we have, is knowing that we are loved and forgiven children of God and that He cares for us. And we see that in Jesus. And so Luther, as he's looking at the law, especially at the Ten Commandments, he starts his meanings with this, that we should fear, love, and trust God. Now, that can be really easy to say, right? But kind of hard to understand. When Luther is talking about fear, he's talking about having a healthy respect. We know what God is capable of. We've read about it in the Old Testament, and we see that God is a God who cares about His people, and that care comes out in different ways. And so there's that healthy respect. There's a love. In John, we read that, or in like John's letter to the church, so 1 John, we read that we love because He first loved us. And so there's an element that these commandments point us to God's love, and we in return respond by loving Him and getting to know Him and connected to Him even more. And then there's a trust, because if we have a God who is true north, is a point that's unshakable, unmovable, ever present, then we have something we can put our trust in, and that is never going to go anywhere. Right? So this is kind of the lane of the Ten Commandments that we're going to look at. Now I want to spend some time looking at the first three commandments and how they come together to help us form a foundation for the rest of the commandments. But we're going to go quick. If you want some more study on them, come see me. I got some books and some things I can direct you to. So the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. Surface level, as we read that, it can be like, oh, yeah, of course, we have one God. Now, there's the Trinity. There's a mystery in having one God. But if we look at the context, we see that this is actually God's people who are moving out of Egypt and about to go on this journey to the holy and promised land. And as they do that, they're coming out of a land where there are many gods. There's a God for the sun. There's a God for the wheat. There's a God for the moon. There's a God for the rain. There's all kinds of different things, right? And God's people have just seen the 10 plagues in action. And each of those plagues demonstrated how powerful God is more than the gods of the Egyptians, right? So they're each kind of focused in on one or two of the deity of the Egyptians and how God is more powerful and more present, and he cares about his people. As we look at this commandment, we might also think, oh yeah, one God. We get that. But do we really? Because I think at times, many of us probably put stuff above God and where he's at, and they become our idols or our gods. For instance, what happens if you want a new car, but you can't afford it? And your focus just becomes getting that new car, and you break relationships. You look at your finances and you go in debt, and you just keep on going and going and going and going. You forget about that idea of loving your neighbor and loving God just because you're so focused on a singular thing. Now, I'm not saying getting a new car is bad, but when it becomes our idol and it's the only thing we can think about, and we forget what it is to love and forgive and have a hope, then I think there might be a little bit of a problem in having no other gods before me. Fear not, because there is love and forgiveness that are part of the picture. As we look at the second commandment, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Right? This is one that it's about respect. Right? If we respect God because of who he is and what he's done for us, then his name is kept sacred and holy for us. So it's not just used flippantly, and it's not used in ways that point people away from what it means to know his love and his forgiveness, but it's used out of reverence and respect in a way that says, yeah, I know who God is, and he is my true north. He is that unmovable, unshakable, ever-present person in my life that cares and loves for me. And so we begin to see his name as holy, and we respect it. And then you have the third commandment, right? Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And the Sabbath day, as we read that full commandment in Exodus, it is pointing the people back to what God has done for them. And throughout the Old Testament, there's this element of remember what God has done for his people. Right? There's a story in Samuel where they resurrect an Ebenezer stone, and thus far the Lord has helped us. And time again, there's these items and ways that they are asked to remember what God has done. When we keep the Sabbath day holy, it is remembering what God has done, what he is doing, and what he's going to do in and through us. Now, we fall short on this one as well. We we have other priorities that come up or things that happen, right? And so we at times forget how much we are loved and how much we're forgiven and how much hope there is in our story. But as we look at God as our true north, that unmoving point that we can keep on going back to, we remember what he's done for us, and we remember what he is doing for us. So all this is good information. And it's good to know that God is a true north. He's not going to move. He's ever present right there for us. He's not shifting in the winds like other gods might be that the Egyptians worshipped. But he's always, always, always there. And we can always count on him. That's good information. But we ask the question, okay, so what? So what about these laws? What is it that we're supposed to know and do with them besides just keep them? Well, we go back to the words of Jesus, right? Jesus came not to abolish the law and get rid of it, which is what a lot of people wanted him to do, but to fulfill it. You see, all of those laws that point us into that true north, that unmoving, unshakable God that's ever present, they give us and point us to a God who loves us, right? They point us to someone who cares enough to actually send Jesus. And so in Jesus, we see that he's a fulfillment of all of this, that his love reigns. And he goes in and he talks to people who weren't supposed to be talked to, right? He goes in to the untouchables of society and touches them. And he changes their story time and time and time again. And as he does that, he shares with them love. And he shares with them forgiveness. And that brings a hope. He does the same thing for us as we look to him as that true north. And these commandments of having one God, respecting him for what he's done and who he is, and remembering what he's done and what he is doing, helps us see that true north and stay there and see Jesus as this pillar in our life that brings love and forgiveness and a hope. That's good to know as well, but the question now is, now what? Now, what do we do with all of that? What do we do with knowing that we have a God who is a true north that's always ever present for us? I think we share it, right? That's what Jesus has asked us to do as he talks about, you are a light to the world, right? If we think about the first century in Jesus' time and when they would light a lamp, they don't do it in the middle of the day so that that light gets lost. They do it at night so it can shine brightly. And I think in our lives, as we look at God as a true north, and he means something to us because he's one God and we respect his name and we remember what he's done and he is doing, then we have stories that have touched our lives through that, right? We have stories that we can share with the people around us that help them see God as that true north. And so my hope and challenge is this, is that when I say, who in your life needs a story of God being someone who is unmoving, unshakable, ever present? My hope is you have 2 or 3 people that come to mind. And then what kind of stories can you share? Not relying on other people to do it, but for you to shine your light to them and share a story of love and forgiveness or hope with the person who came to mind. Now, that might not mean taking them down the Roman roads and saying you're a sinner and you need God and God has come to you and things like that. It could be that, hey, you know what? I had a fight with a coworker the other day, and I had to go to them and talk about what forgiveness means to me. And we were able to reconcile in that forgiveness. And in a real aspect, talk about how and what forgiveness is to you. And in doing that, that points to that forgiveness that we receive that helps us know that there is a God who is unmoving, always there, ever present, and is a true north for us. And so, my hope is that you know, first and foremost, that you are loved and you are forgiven and you have a God who is ever present for you, who is a true north to look at. But also that you can internalize that and share it and be the light of the world and share that true north, that God who is ever present to the world around you, to those 2 or 3 people who came to mind. Amen.